Okay, so have a go at the 10 review questions and see how you get on. The answers will be up in 5 seconds. Okay, so mark your answers. First 5 are from previously, from Unit 1, and the last 5 questions are just from stuff that we've just covered. So we've been looking at the nervous system and the brain, different parts of the brain and memory. So we're now going to focus in on particular cells of the nervous system and how they work. So take a look at the key learning points. We're going to break this topic down into 3 videos, just to try and make it a little bit more manageable. So just pause the video, have a look at the key learning points for this particular video. So again, try to think back to National 5 and what you learnt about these things in National 5. My suggestion is pause the video, take about 5 minutes just to go through these questions and see what you can remember. So hopefully you remember about the nervous system being made up of the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and then running off that, you've got your peripheral nervous system. Hopefully you remember about how information is passed through the nervous system. So we receive information by means of our sense organs. So there are stimuli in the environment that we detect with our receptors, if you like. And that information is then passed along a sensory neuron to the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. And within the central nervous system, we have interneurons. So they connect the sensory with the motor neurons. Decision is made in the central nervous system, and a response is brought about, and that signal is sent down the motor neuron to the effector, and the response happens to the stimulus. Hopefully this is just revision from National 5. We also learned at National 5 about the fact that nerve cells or neurons don't actually touch. There is a gap between one nerve cell and the other nerve cell, and that gap is called a synapse. We learned that an impulse, an electrical impulse, travels down the nerve or down the neuron, and that stimulates these chemicals called neurotransmitters to be released into the synapse, into the gap, and they diffuse across the synapse, and they bind to a receptor on the nerve at the other side of the synapse. And when they bind to the receptor, when enough neurotransmitters or chemicals bind to the receptor, then that causes an impulse to be passed on along the next neuron. So again, hopefully revision, but don't worry if you don't understand it, if you don't remember it, just ask about it. So we're going to have a look just initially at the structure of a nerve cell or a neuron. So there are 3 main types that we know about, that you need to know about, and they have a similar structure. So they're made up of dendrites, a cell body, and an axon. So these bits here, highlighted in yellow, are the dendrites for this particular neuron. The cell body is this bit here, and the axon is this bit that's coloured in purple. So we're just going to have a look at these 3 parts of the neuron and find out what they do. So if we start with the dendrites, so these things basically they receive impulses and they pass the impulses down towards the cell body. So you tend to have quite a lot of dendrites for one cell body. So there's lots of impulses being passed on to the cell body for this particular neuron. The cell body itself is a lot like a normal cell, as you would think of a normal cell. It's got a nucleus, which does what a nucleus does, contains the DNA. You know what DNA does. It also contains other organelles as well. So in particular, it has quite a large number of ribosomes for making the chemicals that we talked about earlier, the neurotransmitters, and also for making enzymes. So you know that neurotransmitters are made of, fill in the gap, protein, because they're made at the ribosomes. So that's the cell body. So we've got our dendrites bringing the impulses in to the cell body, and then the cell body contains the nucleus and ribosomes and other organelles. Running away from the cell body is usually quite a, not always, but usually quite a long fibre called the axon. Okay, so this carries the impulse away from the cell body along the axon to another neuron potentially, or to a muscle. The axon is surrounded or covered in something called myelin, a myelin sheath. And we'll learn a little bit about what this myelin does in a minute or two. So just to review, we've got our dendrites bringing the impulses into the cell body here, which contains the normal cell's organelles, and then you've got the axon carrying the impulse away from the cell body. Okay, so always in this order: dendrites, cell body, axon. So if we relate this to, it looks complicated, but it's not too bad. If you think about this as being the sensory neuron, the interneuron, and the motor neuron, you've got your dendrites for this particular neuron. So the dendrites carry the information to the cell body. You can see here there's quite a few dendrites joining on to one fibre here. So it's quite a long dendrite, this one, running to the cell body, and then away, A for away, is the axon. And then at the end of the axon here, they don't touch this. These are the dendrites of the interneuron. So you can see here there's a synapse, there's the synaptic cleft, or the space between the axon of one neuron, or the axon of the sensory neuron, and the dendrites of the interneuron. So we've got dendrites again running to the cell body, and then you've got the axon running away from the cell body, and then you've got the synapses between the axon of the interneuron and the dendrites of the motor neuron. Dendrites running to the cell body, and then from the cell body, you've got your axon running away, carrying the impulse to the effector in this case. So we're just combining the information. You knew already from National 5 that there was the sensory into a motor neuron. You knew that they didn't touch, there were synapses. We're just combining the information about dendrites, cell bodies, and axons. We mentioned the fact that axons tend to be covered in this substance called myelin. If you look at the diagram here, you can see there's the axon, and then surrounding it are these layers and layers and layers of myelin. And the myelin helps to speed up how quickly the nerve impulse can pass through the axon. So myelin makes nerve impulses travel through the axon a lot quicker. Okay, it helps to insulate the axon. And then there are these, just occasionally, as you can see in the diagram, you've got your myelin sheath, and then you've got a node. Myelin sheath, a node. Myelin sheath, a node. And that works its way along the length of the axon. But the key thing really to remember here is the myelin sheath and the function of the myelin sheath. So myelination is the process of developing this myelin sheath. So when you're first born, your nerves are not actually covered in myelin. Myelination has to take place. The process of myelination has to take place. And so that's one of the reasons why young children and babies are not as well coordinated as adults. So one example is walking. You know, you're not able to walk from birth. And part of the reason for that is how quickly you can get nerve impulses down to your legs from your brain. Because the axons are not covered in this myelin, you're not able to send signals to your muscles quickly enough in order to control walking. And it's only after the myelin has developed around the axons that you're able to pass the messages quickly enough, and you're able to control walking as well. So the second major thing that you need to know about is glial cells and what glial cells do. So the two main cells, you've got your neurons, and we've talked about sensory, inter, and motor neurons. But your nervous system is also made up of cells called glial cells. And these really help to support the neurons, if you like. And they support the neurons in two ways. The first way is they support them physically. They actually physically hold the neurons in place, if you like. They act as a structure and a support for the neurons. And the second thing that the glial cells do is that it's the glial cells that actually help to produce the myelin that surrounds the axons. So you can see in this diagram here, there's the axon, the yellow, and then you've got this glial cell. And gradually, over a period of time, the glial cell helps to develop these layers of myelin surrounding the axon, and that's what speeds up how quickly these impulses can travel through the axon. So you just need to know what myelin does and basically what happens if you haven't got myelin. So we've already said that the myelin speeds up how quickly you can send nerve impulses around your body. So obviously, if you don't have myelin around your nerves, around the axons, the impulses that you're sending are going to be sent a lot slower. You don't need to know about specific diseases, but it might be useful just having a look at some of the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. So you can see from the diagram here that with multiple sclerosis, it actually affects the myelin that surrounds the axon, and it damages the myelin surrounding the axon. And that basically slows down how quickly nerve impulses are sent through the body. And that can lead to various issues. So maybe have a look at that. But again, you won't be asked about specific diseases. Again, just showing basically what happens in MS, showing the damage and the exposed axons, slowing down the nerve impulses. So that's the first part. Have a look at the key learning points and move on to the second video.